I was 15 years old when I took a babysitting job that still keeps me up at night. I wasn't old enough for most legitimate work, so I picked up money however I could. Lawn mowing, odd jobs, watching kids for neighbors. Nothing too unusual for a teenager trying to have spending money. But one afternoon during summer break, I was scrolling through online classifieds when I came across a listing from a woman who needed an overnight babysitter. She worked late-night shifts and needed someone to stay at her house with her young daughter, a 6-year-old named Clara. According to the post, Clara would already be sound asleep before I even arrived and would likely sleep through the entire night. The pay was surprisingly generous for what sounded like basically nothing. Sit in someone's house, watch TV, get paid. I reached out, and she responded within the hour. She called me that evening and came across as completely normal, calm, clear, answered every question I had. She explained that she'd already leave for her shift before I arrived, so she'd leave a key hidden near the front door and told me exactly where to find it. Since I was still just 15, my mom insisted on speaking with her first. They talked for several minutes, and whatever was said must have been convincing, because my mom came back and told me it sounded perfectly fine. The job was set for the following night, around 9:30 p.m. My mom drove me to the address, a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from home, at the end of a dead-end street lined with thick trees. Every single light inside the house was on. I found the key right where the woman said it would be, let myself in, and waved goodbye to my mom as she backed out of the driveway. Then I was alone. The house seemed ordinary at first. Family photos on the wall. A couple of toys near the couch. A small pink backpack leaning against a chair. Children's drawings pinned to the fridge with magnets. I wanted to get a sense of the layout, so I walked through the first floor. A kitchen connected to a hallway lined with several rooms. I stepped into the hallway and glanced into an open doorway on my right. There was a man standing inside the room. He was facing the window, staring out into complete darkness. There was nothing out there. No light, no movement, nothing to look at. I stood frozen for several seconds before I finally said something. The instant I made a sound, he turned around. The first thing I noticed was his smile. The second thing I noticed was that one of his front teeth was missing. I asked who he was. His smile didn't move. He didn't answer. I backed out of the hallway and called the woman immediately. She answered after a few rings and sounded confused when I described the man. Then, almost like she suddenly remembered, she explained that he was her brother. He had dementia, she said, and sometimes wandered the house at night. She told me he was completely harmless and not to worry. That didn't make me feel better at all. If her brother lived there, why hadn't she mentioned him? Not in the ad, not on our phone call, not when my mom spoke with her. Before she hung up, she casually told me to help myself to anything in the fridge and that I could sleep in the guest room at the end of the hall. I stood there for a long moment trying to decide what to do. Eventually, I continued down the hallway. The room where the man had been was still open, but he was no longer visible in the doorway, which somehow felt worse. Further down the hall, I counted 4 more doors. I tried the first one. Locked. Second one. Locked. Third one locked. The fourth opened a few inches before catching on something. I peeked through the gap. The room was dark and appeared empty. I pushed it a little further, just an empty room. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but then I passed the fridge again and something stopped me. I looked more closely at the children's drawings. The paper had yellowed around the edges. The magnets holding them up had dust sitting on top of them. The little pink backpack I had noticed earlier, it looked faded, like it had been sitting in the same spot for a long time. I started thinking about how, in nearly half an hour of being in this house, I hadn't heard a single sound from a child. No breathing. No shifting in a bed. Nothing. I wasn't even sure Clara existed. I made it to the guest room at the end of the hall. Small room. I set my bag on the floor. And then I noticed there was no lock on the door. I turned around, and he was there, standing at the opposite end of the hallway, looking straight at me. That same smile. The missing tooth visible even from a distance. I had no idea how long he'd been standing there. I hadn't heard a single footstep. And that's where things took a turn I wasn't ready for. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. I shut the door and sat on the edge of the bed trying to breathe. I called my mom 3 times before she picked up. I told her everything. The man no one had mentioned, the locked doors, the absence of any sign that a child actually lived there. She went quiet for a moment. Then she told me she was on her way. Immediately, hearing that was a relief and a gut punch at the same time. Because if my mom, who had spoken to this woman herself and said it sounded fine, was now driving over in a panic, something was genuinely wrong. I sat completely still, staring at the doorknob. I tried calling the woman back 3 times. She never picked up. A few minutes passed, and then I heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward the room. Slow and steady. They stopped right outside my door. Everything went silent. I kept my eyes locked on the knob. Then the door creaked open, just a few inches. Not wide enough for me to see who was standing outside. It just hung there, partially open, while whoever was on the other side made no move to enter. I knew it had to be him. That was the moment I made my decision. I got off the bed, crossed to the window, and forced it open. I climbed out and dropped into the backyard. Then I ran. I didn't stop until I hit the street, crossed to the other side, and kept going until I was nearly a full block away. I pulled out my phone to call my mom, and that's when a text message appeared. It was from the woman's number. It said, "Where are you going?" I spun around and looked back toward the house. No one was outside. No one at the windows. I hadn't seen any cameras when I was inside. But somehow, she knew the moment I left. That was when I stopped rationalizing and accepted that something was seriously wrong. I called my mom and told her not to come directly to the house. I had her pick me up further down the street. When she pulled up, I jumped in, locked the door, and we drove away without looking back. I never contacted that woman again. I never found out who the man really was. I never confirmed whether Clara existed at all. I never found out why every bedroom door except one was locked. There's a small chance it was all innocent, and I panicked over nothing. But that text message, knowing the exact second I walked out of that house, that detail has never stopped bothering me. Something was wrong in that house. I'm just glad I got out before I found out what. But that story isn't the only one I have. The next one didn't involve a stranger's house. It was a regular cleaning job. And what happened inside that empty apartment has never had a rational explanation. When I was around 15 or 16, I picked up a summer job cleaning out vacant units at a low-income housing complex. I got the gig through a property manager I'd done work for before. And for a high school student, The pay was solid. The job itself was straightforward. When a tenant moved out, we'd go in, clear out whatever was left behind, scrub the place down, and get it ready for the next family. A lot of the units had been abandoned quickly. Furniture left mid-room, food still in the fridge, clothes still hanging in closets. It was strange how often people just seemed to vanish overnight and leave everything behind. One afternoon, I was working alongside a university student I'll call Maya. She was about 20 or 21, confident and experienced, and naturally took the lead while I followed her direction. We were assigned to a unit on the end of a row. The layout matters here, so let me walk you through it. You entered through the front door into the living room. To the right were 2 sets of stairs, one going up to the bedrooms, one going down behind a door to the basement. The basement stairs turned twice on the way down, meaning you couldn't see the bottom from the main floor. The basement itself was just one large open concrete room, unfinished, with a washer, dryer, furnace, and a single hanging light bulb. No alcoves, no side rooms, no closets, nowhere to hide. The unit was a mess. The previous tenants had clearly left in a hurry, and the kitchen was filthy. We spent the first part of the afternoon bagging everything up and sorting what could be donated. Then we started the deep clean. At one point, we had to pull the oven and fridge away from the wall to scrub behind them. We also removed the storage drawer from the bottom of the oven. When it came time to put it back, we discovered the rails were bent. Maya and I ended up standing on opposite sides and kicking it until it wedged itself back in. When we tested it afterward, completely stuck. Wouldn't budge. We figured the property manager could deal with it and moved on. After that, we split up. Maya headed upstairs to handle the bedrooms, while I stayed on the main floor removing the glass light fixtures to wash them. I was up on a ladder in the living room when I heard Maya call my name from upstairs. I called back. No response. I climbed down and went up to find her. She was cleaning a bedroom with headphones on. When I asked what she needed, she looked at me like I was confused. She hadn't called me. She laughed and shook her head. I shrugged it off and went back downstairs. There was one thing about the unit that had been bothering me since we arrived: the attic access hatch above the staircase. It was just an open square in the ceiling, no cover, leading into a dark crawl space. Every time I walked underneath it, I found myself instinctively looking up into that square of solid darkness. I don't know why, but something about it made my skin prickle. A few minutes later, I heard my name again. This time I called back immediately, and Maya shouted down from upstairs, "That wasn't me! You're hearing things!" I told myself she was right. I went back to work. But what happened next wasn't something I could explain away, and by the end of the afternoon, we were both running. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing the light fixtures when I turned around to grab a clean sponge and nearly tripped. The oven drawer was sitting halfway out on the floor, the same drawer that Maya and I had kicked into place, the same one we had both confirmed was completely jammed afterwards. I stood there staring at it. Then I kicked it back in. It took several hard kicks, grabbed the handle, pulled. Nothing. Solid. Stuck exactly like before. I went back to the sink. Maybe 2 minutes later, I turned around again and almost walked straight into it. The drawer was back out. I hadn't heard a single sound. No scraping, no sliding. Nothing. And nobody else was on the main floor. I left it where it was. I moved on to reinstalling the clean light fixtures. Since it was a bright afternoon, I turned off the lights while I worked so I could see the wiring more clearly. I was up on a small step ladder, holding a fixture in place, trying to line it up, and then the light flipped on. The sudden brightness startled me so badly that I lurched backward on the ladder. The fixture flew out of my hands and crashed to the floor, barely missing my head. I sat there on the ground for a few seconds. When I looked up, I could see the light switch from where I'd fallen. Nobody was near it, and I could hear Maya still moving around upstairs. There was no possible way she could have come downstairs, hit the switch, and gotten back up in the span of a few seconds. The switch had turned on by itself. I wasn't thinking about anything paranormal. I told myself there was a rational explanation, but I was done working alone. I went upstairs and told Maya what had happened. She got quiet and then admitted something she hadn't mentioned. A few minutes earlier, she thought she'd heard someone call her name too, and it didn't sound like me. We were officially creeped out. The only thing left on our list was sweeping the basement. Neither of us wanted to go down there alone, so we went together. It was exactly what I described. One open concrete room, no obstructions, nowhere to conceal anything. We swept, finished quickly, and headed back upstairs. We started gathering our gear in the living room. I was standing maybe 2 feet from the open basement door when it happened. From somewhere below us came the sound of heavy footsteps. Both of us stopped moving. The footsteps were deliberate and clear. And then, they broke into a sprint. They were charging up those basement stairs fast, getting louder with every second, heading straight toward us. I grabbed the basement door and slammed it shut as hard as I could. Then we ran. Straight out the front door, across the yard, and didn't stop until we were on the far side of the complex. We went back to the property manager and reported that someone had been inside the unit. We never told her the full story. We left our cleaning supplies inside and never returned. As far as we know, she called the police before anyone else went in. What would we have said anyway? That something spent the entire afternoon calling our names, moving a jammed drawer, flipping on a light switch, and then chased us up the stairs from an empty basement? The basement that had nowhere for anyone to hide? Even now, more than 2 decades later, hearing someone run up a staircase still sends a cold feeling through me. I've never been able to explain what happened in that unit, and I've stopped trying. The third story is different from the first two. There was no mysterious stranger, no unexplained presence. What made this one terrifying was how slowly the danger revealed itself, and how many times I told myself everything was fine. I've always been the type to hustle. When I was younger, I never said no to work, and my mom knew an older couple from her church group who needed help around their property for a couple of weeks. Their names were Gerald and Margaret, and they were both in their late 60s. They lived out in a rural area about 40 minutes from home, one of those old farmhouses with a long gravel driveway, overgrown hedges, and dense woods stretching out behind the property. The deal was simple. I'd stay there for just over a week, help Gerald with outdoor work, clearing brush, cleaning out the garage, moving furniture, painting the fence, that kind of thing, and they'd pay me when we finished. My mom trusted Gerald from years back, and when I first met Margaret, she came across as sweet, quiet but warm. She kept asking if I was hungry and whether I needed anything. The first full day, Gerald showed me around the property and walked me through the list of things we'd tackle. Margaret made dinner. I noticed early on that she asked my name 3 different times throughout the evening. Each time, Gerald would give a small patient smile and say she forgets things sometimes. I figured he meant the kind of occasional forgetfulness you'd expect from someone in their late 60s. I didn't think much of it. That night, I went to bed around 11. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up. There were footsteps in the hallway. Someone was walking back and forth right outside my door. Steady, slow, creaking with every step. I assumed it was Gerald using the bathroom. But the footsteps didn't go anywhere. They just paced. Down the hall and back. Down and back. I lay there in the dark listening for about 10 minutes until they finally stopped, directly outside my door. I stared at the wide gap under the door and could make out what looked like 2 shadows. 2 feet, standing still. Then, after a long moment, they moved away. The next morning, I brought it up while Gerald and I were working outside. He didn't seem surprised. He said Margaret sometimes wandered at night when she got confused and had bad dreams, and that I shouldn't worry about it. When I asked if I could lock my door, he half laughed and said the guest room was too old to have one. I let it go. The second night was worse. I woke again to the same pacing, except faster this time. I could hear Margaret murmuring to herself in the hallway. I couldn't make out most of it, but I heard my name once, which sent a chill straight through me. Her shadow passed under the door several times. Then the doorknob turned. Stopped. The door opened an inch. It stayed cracked open, and through the gap, I heard a whisper I couldn't quite make out. Then the door pulled shut again. I barely slept after that. In the morning, I told Gerald exactly what happened. He explained it away again. He said she probably forgot the room was occupied, and that this kind of thing had been happening more frequently. He asked me, somewhat firmly, not to bring it up in front of her because it embarrassed her. During the day, Margaret seemed normal, making lunch, folding laundry, watering potted plants on the porch. But every so often, I'd look up and find her watching me from across a room with a flat, unreadable stare, like she didn't recognize me and didn't want me there. On the 4th day, Gerald and I were clearing out a storage shed behind the house. Behind some boxes, I found a dented metal walker that looked like it had been thrown. Next to it was a broken picture frame with dark brownish stains dried into the glass. Gerald didn't comment on it. I didn't ask. Later that same day, going inside to use the bathroom, I noticed a long scratch along the hallway wall at about chest height, like something had been dragged across it. One of the doors downstairs had small holes in it, as if something had been slammed against it repeatedly. I started cataloging things I didn't have explanations for. That night, I placed my suitcase in front of the bedroom door. It wasn't heavy enough to stop anyone, but the scraping sound would at least wake me up if the door opened. Around 2:30, I heard it, the suitcase dragging across the floor. The door was already halfway open. Margaret was standing in the doorway in her nightgown, mouth hanging open, breathing heavily. I said her name, trying to sound calm. She stepped into the room, and that's when I saw it. She was holding a kitchen knife at her side. She walked toward the bed and began whispering the same phrase over and over. "You don't belong here." She said it 5 times. She came all the way to the side of the bed and stood directly over me, with the knife hanging in her hand. I yelled Gerald's name as loud as I could. Margaret flinched at the sound, turned, and marched stiffly out of the room. She slammed the door behind her. Gerald appeared maybe 30 seconds later, looking more annoyed than concerned, like I'd woken him up over nothing. When I told him she'd been standing over me with a knife, he said she wouldn't hurt anyone. He said she wasn't herself at night. I told him I wanted to go home. He said it was 3 in the morning and my mom was probably asleep, and that we'd figure it out in the morning. I should have called right then. Instead, I pushed the dresser in front of the door and stayed awake until sunrise. In the morning, Margaret made pancakes and smiled like nothing had happened. Gerald apologized in a way that didn't feel like an apology and mentioned that her memory had been deteriorating. When I asked directly whether she had ever hurt anyone before, he paused before admitting she had gotten upset with a caregiver once, and that it was handled. That was the first time I understood that he had been hiding things from me the entire time. I told him again I was leaving. He said he'd drive me home the next morning after one final task, and once they'd paid me. My mom was working late. I agreed to wait one more day. That afternoon, while Gerald was outside on the phone, I went to pack my bag and couldn't find it in my room. I found it in the laundry room. On the outer pocket was a blood stain, obvious, dark, unmistakable. Gerald came in and told me he had cut himself earlier and moved my bag while he cleaned up. He ended the explanation with, "Stop worrying." I said I was calling my mom. He tried again to calm me down. I went upstairs, tried to call. The line failed twice. I sent a text. It didn't go through. Gerald refused to give me the Wi-Fi password. That was the moment I felt truly trapped. The final night, I didn't get into bed. I sat fully dressed on top of the blanket, shoes on, bag at my feet, waiting for morning. Around midnight, Gerald came upstairs and told me to move the dresser away from the door because it was a fire hazard. I refused at first. It was the first time I heard him actually yell. I moved it just enough for the door to open and sat back down in the dark. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Margaret downstairs, yelling this time. It sounded like she was screaming at Gerald. Then I heard glass shatter. Gerald said her name, trying to calm her. And then came a loud crash followed by him shouting in pain. She had attacked him. I cracked my door open. The hallway was dark, but light was coming up from the staircase below. Footsteps hit the stairs fast. I slammed the door and shoved the dresser back as hard as I could. Seconds later, Margaret hit the door from the other side. The knob rattled violently. She started screaming the same thing again. "You don't belong here!" over and over, slamming against the wood until something sharp struck the door and a piece of it splintered inward. I could hear Gerald groaning below. I looked at the window. It was the only way out. I forced it up, kicked out the screen, and climbed out onto the small roof over the porch below. I dropped into the bushes, grabbed my bag, and ran down the gravel driveway. As I reached the road, I heard the front door open behind me. Margaret was on the porch, yelling, holding what appeared to be a fireplace poker. I kept running until I had enough signal to call 911. Police and paramedics arrived about 15 minutes later. Gerald had a gash on his head and a broken wrist. Margaret was taken away by paramedics. The police contacted my mom, and she came as quickly as she could. Later, Gerald told her that Margaret had been getting significantly worse for months, but that he didn't want to put her in a facility. He thought he could manage it on his own. He also admitted she had attacked 2 previous caregivers before me. My mom held herself together remarkably well, all things considered. I still think about all the moments I had a chance to leave and didn't. Every sign was there. I just kept telling myself I was overreacting, that I didn't want to make a scene or seem dramatic. And I think that's something a lot of us do. We hold on to the idea that things are probably fine for as long as we possibly can, right up until they're not. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what's happening around you. It's convincing yourself it isn't happening at all.